Johnny Mack is here with us on the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, John, we got a lot to dive into here today, and I guess let's start with some of the NFL news because Mike Tomlin, we were talking about this the other day, and Barrett, who played for the Steelers, said, look, they got three guys that have ever coached that team. Tomlin's not in any trouble, but Mike Florio reporting a group of Steelers limited partners want him fired. He's never had a losing season in 11 years. He's won 10 games 8 times. So, is Mike Tomlin's performance on Saturday or Sunday got him in some hot water?
I don't think so, no. I think it speaks to where we are as a society, and, everything is sped up now. But if there's one team that's going to stay the course, it's obviously the Pittsburgh Steelers, as you mentioned. They've had 3 coaches since 1968, and they've all won Super Bowls. So they understand what continuity means, and it's a heck of a lot better than the alternative. And you don't have to go out of the division to see that. The Cleveland Browns would be the polar opposite, and you see what a constant change has done to that organization. They're not going to fire him. It was a tough loss. Anytime you lose at home as a significant favorite and you're supposed to win the football game, you're going to receive some heat, and certainly the week after in the moment, but it'll die down. I don't know a lot of people that agreed with his decision to do the onside kick so early. But while I say that, I count myself in that camp as well. I would have kicked off. But I do understand his point and the fact that the defense was terrible all day. And he felt they weren't going to stop him. And he took a shot, and obviously the kick was really bad. They didn't execute very well, and he kind of looked bad after. But I do understand his thought process, and maybe it all goes back to the Ryan Shazier injury, because they were not the same defense since he left the lineup with that horrible injury. And maybe Jacksonville was just better.
His offensive coordinator, Todd Haley, it seems that he has always had some sort of news surrounding him. Ben Roethlisberger on the radio in Pittsburgh hinted that he wants Haley to remain. Is that just propaganda there for Haley, or do you anticipate a split between Big Ben and his coordinator?
I do. He's out of contract. Ben said some weird things, in the fact that he kind of alluded that he's not allowed to audible. And I was watching that game closely, and he certainly audibles. So he was speaking specifically about a quarterback sneak, and he's not allowed to quarterback sneak. Maybe that's true. Maybe they're trying to keep him healthy. Who knows? But he's out of contract, Todd Haley. I think he's going to go down to Dallas potentially, although it looks like they're sticking with Scott Linehan. So, maybe he could pop up in Cleveland. Who knows? But continuity is always best, as I just said with Tomlin. You just get the feeling that those two don't get along, and that's probably not going to change. So from Tomlin's standpoint, a lot of times when you do have a significant playoff loss like that, and the head coach is obviously staying, that means changes on the staff and changing some assistants.
John, you mentioned Cleveland. The Plain Dealer is reporting that Ben McAdoo is interviewing for the Browns' offensive coordinator vacancy. So could Ben McAdoo resurface as a coordinator, right after being fired by the Giants?
Yeah, it's potential. There was a lot of speculation he would go back to Green Bay, but they went with Philbin, another guy they brought back. So I think everyone kind of realizes he's probably not a head coach, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's a bad offensive coordinator. He did some good things in New York before he got the head coaching job, trying to keep that offense afloat with, I constantly tell everybody, whether they want to realize it or not, is a below-average quarterback. So Hugh Jackson obviously needs an offensive coordinator. That was probably, while they haven't publicized it, that was probably one of the conditions of him keeping his job because they haven't had an offensive coordinator, and they certainly need something to get things going in the right direction on that staff.
John, we got more coaching news. NFL Network reporting that Mike Munchak, the offensive line coach of the Steelers, will have his second interview in the Cardinals. Is he the favorite in Arizona?
I don't know, because I think Pat Shurmur was, and obviously they did not get him. He's going to be going to the Giants. So now you kind of reboot it. John DeFilippo is supposed to get a second interview with the Cardinals. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. I think everyone panics when you lose their first choice. As I pointed out with the Eagles, that worked out pretty well for them. So just because you don't get the apple of your eye doesn't necessarily mean the world is ending. And the Cardinals just have to kind of step back and see where they want to go from here.
All right, let's go on to other coaching news here, because John Robinson said he has no concern about Marcus Mariota playing for his third head coach since entering the league. But could one of those head coaches have Philadelphia ties?
Yeah, I mean, all three of them are speculated to potentially get interviews with the Titans, and that's DeFilippo, that's Frank Reich, and that's Jim Schwartz. So all three of them could be in the mix. I can't imagine, though, that because of the step backward that Mariota took this season, that they would hire a defensive mind. That would kind of scratch Jim out of it and leave it to Flip and Frank Reich. And certainly they would fit what they need, a so-called quarterback guru that can help a kid develop. And a lot of it stems to the fact of what kind of job they did with Carson Wentz. Although I caution people, Carson Wentz was far ahead of the curve as compared to somebody like Mariota when you're talking about a pro-style offense.
Real quick on Reich, he's a name mentioned for the Titans job. He's a quarterback coach. He's kind of a guy similar, I guess, to where Peterson was. He was an offensive coordinator that really no one really understood his role. And when Doug was with Andy, I guess everybody assumed that Andy ran the offense and called the plays. Frank's in a similar situation where people don't really know how much of impact or what he really does. So, you know, maybe that tie to Peterson and what he does for Peterson, similar to what Peterson did for Andy, has his name coming up for the Titans job.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the big – I mean, he doesn't call plays. But offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators for defensive-minded head coaches, they do everything else. I mean, they're the guys who put together the game plan, and they're the guys who do the heavy lifting. The head coach who wants to do that just then takes over the play calling. So I'm not trying to downgrade, because that's a big part of it. But head coaching the job is too big. And as far as game planning and putting all that together, Frank Reich's an offensive coordinator. That's what offensive coordinators do. Doug just happens to be the play caller on game days. So he knows how to do it. He knows what to do. So it's no surprise. And people in the NFL realize that. It's just a matter of, can you get a feel? And as I always said, when you're hiring head coaches, you're not necessarily looking for the best play caller. And I'm not, by no means am I trying to say Frank isn't, because I have no idea. What you're looking for is a leader and a guy who can lead an organization. And that's the most important part.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Let's go to the next name, John DeFilippo, expected to get a second interview for the Cardinals head coaching vacancy. Now, we talked about a second interview in Arizona for Mike Munchak, and now DeFilippo getting called back for that one. Steve Wilks is also a choice in there, but DeFilippo has other opportunities. If he doesn't get a head coaching job, he's probably still on somebody's list for an offensive coordinator spot.
Yeah, he will be. I think it's going to be very difficult for the Eagles to keep him no matter what, unless Frank, say, gets the Titans job and they can elevate him to offensive coordinator. Then they would have a chance to keep him. But if he doesn't get a head coaching job, I certainly do think he will get a coordinator's job. And the Eagles can't prevent that this year like they did last year. He would have been the Jets' offensive coordinator, but they prevented him from leaving because he was under contract, and you're allowed to. They won't be allowed to do that this year.
Steve Wilks, the defensive coordinator for the Panthers, in the mix for that Cardinals job as well. Give us his candidacy or the possibility of him remaining as the coordinator in Carolina, or do you think that he either a head coach or goes someplace else?
Well, he's another perfect example of what I was just kind of trying to talk about with Frank, and then obviously Ron Rivera is the head coach down there. He's a defensive-minded guy, more of a CEO type though. And you'll see somebody coming in this week, Mike Zimmer. George Edwards is his defensive coordinator. And he got at least one head coaching interview. So people understand how it works, and he's very highly regarded. And people seem to be wanting to go young now, whether it's offense or defense, trying to find that sort of home run. Sean McVay being a perfect example on the offensive side of the ball. And you kind of want that guy who's going to be there. We talked about continuity for 20-plus years, but you also have to be very, very cautious because we also just talked about Ben McAdoo. Adam Gase looked good early, doesn't necessarily look good now. So sometimes it's not bad to have some experience.
And then Rams offensive coordinator Matt LaFleur is interviewing for the Titans head coaching job too. So I guess if you are tied to, it shows if you're tied to a good team, a good offense, a virtual unknown, right? Matt LaFleur is now getting head coaching opportunities potentially.
Yeah, that says more about what the league thinks about the job Sean McVay did, to be honest. That's why he's on the fast path to being a head coach, what he was able to do in turning around Jared Goff. So that's kind of what people try to replicate success in other cities. And that's why you look at the Eagles about to play in the NFC Championship game, and you got three names getting head coaching interviews.
Another job that we haven't heard a lot about is Houston, with Bill O'Brien staying there. But the reports that their defensive coordinator, Mike Vrabel, could be another candidate for the Titans job. So we know O'Brien's staying. We don't know what's happening with the GM above him there, but they might lose their defensive coordinator. So Vrabel, another candidate for a head coaching job.
Yeah, they actually brought back Ryan Gain as expected. He was there before, so he's the GM, and they gave Bill O'Brien a 4-year extension. So they're set and just wait and see. Mike Vrabel, depending on who you talk to, might be the leader in the clubhouse in Tennessee. But I think a lot of that is just people putting two and two together, reading tea leaves, and assuming John Robinson, the GM there, because he's got New England roots, that he would want Vrabel. I don't think that's the case.
Right.
I think he wants an offensive mind to fix Marcus Mariota.
Okay. We talked earlier, Matt Collar from 1500 ESPN, great article he wrote about Case Keenum. We talked about Pat Shurmur. He said that he thought Shurmur was the MVP of the offense. That's the impact that he has brought to that team. And he has now, of course, emerged as the Giants' top choice to replace Ben McAdoo. But would you go on to say that this team would be in a similar spot regardless of who the quarterback of that team was?
No. I think Case has played very, very well. As I said, I think he would be top 5, and he will be top 5 in MVP voting. He's played extremely well. And I know some people saw that New Orleans game and saw some of the throws and said, how has this guy done this? But again, if you look at the larger picture and how he's played from week to week, I think he's got 8 games with over 100 passer rating. He's been lights out. A lot of that has to do with Pat Shurmur. And the difference between Pat Shurmur and Norv Turner when he was there is like light in day.
Who, by the way, got a job in Carolina.
Which is astonishing after what he did in Minnesota. But and that's, I don't want to doubt, when we kind of talked about Pat yesterday on the show, I thought he should have been elevated before the Eagles hired Doug Peterson. Not that Doug has turned out great, so the Eagles made a great decision there, even if it was the third choice. But he's a really, really good coach, and you'll see it this weekend. I don't know if the Vikings are going to win or lose the game, but you will see how well that scheme is run and sort of the things they can do offensively and the way he's able to get receivers open and things of that nature. Now, I say all that, and they also have tremendous receivers, and I have a good tight end, and I got a running back that's extremely fast, extremely quick. So they have a lot of pieces as well. But, again, when you compare what he's been able to do versus Norv Turner, who's got this huge reputation in this league, it kind of tells you how good a coach Pat Shurmur is.
Yeah. John, when we opened the show today, I said, all right, in the NFL you get a 16-game sample size. And a lot of people say, well, that's a good enough sample size to tell us the story of who you are. The Vikings defense and the Eagles defense are both top 5 in the league, statistically speaking. Combined, they played in a 16-game season. Minnesota played 5 playoff teams, and Philadelphia played 3. So do the stats tell the real story of who these defenses are? Do their numbers suggest they they bullied a lot of bad teams? Or do the numbers not lie in the case of the Eagles and Vikings defense?
No, they don't lie. These are two of the best defenses in football. And look, I've said it before with the Eagles schedule, and this has been a season-long narrative. I don't like these strength of schedule theories for the reason, one of the reasons the Eagles don't have a strong schedule is because they beat everybody. So all people look at is the opposing record. Well, this team lost this many games, and so on and so on. Well, part of the reason they lost those games is because the Eagles were beating up on them, and the Vikings as well in the NFC North. Now, if you rewind all the way back to week 1, everyone was saying, well, how difficult is the Eagles' schedule? It's ridiculous. You got 2 games against the Cowboys, who are coming off a 13-win season. You got 2 games against the Giants, who are coming off an 11-win season. So back then, it was this impossible schedule. And now everyone says, well, it was easy. Well, it was easy because the Eagles were beating up on these teams. And their defense is going to be – you can only rate things on the rest of the league. And, look, it's not perfect because obviously in the 16-game schedule with a 32-team league, you don't play everybody. But when you get to 16 games, and you are, in Minnesota's case, number 1 in total defense, scoring defense, third down defense, that means you're pretty darn good. And Frank Reich admitted that today, and he said that's the best defense they will face all season.
We talked earlier, I want to go back to Shurmur real fast, that he kind of the whole quarterback hall of mirrors is kind of coming to play here with Bradford going to Minnesota, Keenum being in St. Louis with Foles. Foles was the starter. He gets replaced by Keenum. He goes to Minnesota. Bradford gets traded there. We know that whole Pythagorean of how that's winded up, that these two guys are now playing. But Shurmur really is the guy that holds the key to a lot of this because he's in Philly, doesn't get the job, goes to Minnesota, Bradford gets hurt, and according to Matt Collier, had a big push to get Bradford to go there. So Bridgewater getting hurt, and Shurmur landing in Minnesota really is another big storyline of how Bradford ended up there and Wentz is here, and then the injuries and these two guys. So these two teams have a lot of synergy between them.
Yeah, from Pat's standpoint, obviously he was here for a very long time with Andy Reid before, and he left the first time to get the Cleveland job, and then came back under Chip Kelly as well. And he's always been a big Sam Bradford guy, had him in St. Louis as well. And so he does have a lot of respect for Sam's ability. And you know what? I don't know anybody in the NFL who looks at Sam Bradford and says, from an arm talent perspective, he's got the ability to make every throw you could ever ask in any offense. But we all know the reasons with Sam, and it's got to do with health and injuries. And he's had a star-crossed career. Mm-hmm. And if he was healthy and he didn't tear the 2 ACLs, you'd probably be talking about a Hall of Fame quarterback. But you're not, and that's a shame. But it
really is.
And
when we asked him, are the Minnesota fans sold on Keenum? He said, well, they still they see what they saw in the second half. Him throwing the interception, skittish on the move. He said going back to training camp, Bradford's launching balls 20, 30, 40 yards, falling right in the hands of Diggs, and Keenum's passes are fluttering and incomplete. And
well, that's the thing, and that's what Sam does. It truly is. I mean, there's like 5 people on the planet who can throw the football like Sam Bradford, and certainly Case Keenum is not one of them. However, Case Keenum can extend plays, and you see it time and time again. Sam cannot at this stage. He cannot. So in that aspect, he's made the offense much more dangerous, because we see it right here in the opposite direction in Philadelphia. You had a quarterback who could extend plays. Now you have a quarterback that can't, and it makes it more difficult because you have to stay on schedule. You don't have any unscripted offense. So it depends the way you look at it. But certainly, from an arm talent standpoint, you can't compare the two. And a lot of the Case Keenum hand-wringing has to do with the fact that Mike Zimmer, and I don't know if Matt told you, I mean, he won't say, he's the one quote that I love is he's playing with a horseshoe up as you-know-what. He said about his own quarterback. And from Zimmer's standpoint, he feels that Case plays better if he thinks there's a chance he's going to be replaced. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a motivational tool.
It's almost like, why name him the starter that by not seems like it's motivation?
Exactly. And that's what he's doing. But if you have the fan bases, obviously the vast majority is casual. They don't pay attention to the stuff every day. They read that and say, well, even the head coach doesn't believe in the quarterback. I don't think that's the case. He's the unquestioned starter. You saw that on Sunday. I mean, there was an opportunity there. If you're thinking about, hey, this game's over, and who's got the big arm? The only way you're going to win it in a Hail Mary. There was an opportunity. Let's put Sam Bradford in the game, who's active. Let him throw the football to the end zone. No, he got Case Keenum in the game because he's the starting quarterback, and it's not a question. He's earned that right. But Mike Zimmer feels it's better for him if he sort of keeps egging him on and says, I don't know. But we all know, as I said, this guy, if you look at his numbers, if you look at his film, and as I said, at the end of the year, he's going to be top 5 in MVP voting.
Yeah. Interesting, asking Matt about it, I said, if you can rank them, how would the fans pick them? And he said Bridgewater 1, probably Keenum 2, and Bradford 3. So how ass backwards is that?
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody loves Teddy Bridgewater, and they should. He's a phenomenal guy, and that was such a horrible injury. If you're not rooting for Teddy Bridgewater, you don't have a heart. But also, that's absurd. I mean, there's a reason that he didn't even dress for the Saints game. He's not ready to play. He's not physically equipped. He's not the same guy. If he was the same guy, before the injury, I'd say yes, he's got a potential to be a franchise quarterback. I don't think he's ever going to get back to that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it was that's who they wanted to play this particular week. I think it was just more if all were healthy, they would prefer Bridgewater was their guy over the other two.
Well, if all were healthy, they're probably right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's I thought Teddy was going to be a star quarterback in this league for a long time. And you sort of have the best of both worlds. He doesn't have the arm of Sam Bradford, but it's good. It's above average. And he's got mobility before the injury. So you have both equations.
Yeah.
Whereas with Case doesn't have the typical NFL arm, but he can move very, very well. And Sam has the tremendous arm and can't move a leg.
A lot of football. Tomorrow we'll dive more into the game. I want to get into some of the offensive weapons for Minnesota. Keep in mind, they lost their best offensive weapon early in the year, Dalvin Cook, who had 74 carries for 354 yards in 4 games, and then he got hurt. So they're missing their top 2 quarterbacks and their top running back, and yet here they are at 13-3 in the NFC Championship game. John McMullen at JF McMullen. And don't forget, you can vote for John for your favorite Sports Bash segment of the year. And right now, John is a runaway winner in that category, but extend his lead. Extend the lead. Vote for the Sports Bash Awards at 973ESPN.com. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, Mike.